The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the vast expanse of dried grassland in shades of amber and rust. Jacob McAllister squinted against the harsh light, his weathered hands gripping the reins as his horse picked its way through the scattered rocks and withered sagebrush. The autumn of 1889 had been particularly cruel to this stretch of Arizona territory, leaving the earth cracked and thirsty, waiting for rains that refused to come. Jacob had been riding since dawn, following the stragglers of his herd that had wandered too far north during the night. At 32, he'd spent the better part of his adult life in these unforgiving lands, learning their moods and dangers. The red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels in the distance, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand that now whipped across his face, stinging his eyes and coating his throat with dust. He pulled his bandana higher over his nose, remembering Mary's gentle hands as she'd tied this very piece of cloth around his neck 5 years ago. The memory still cut deep. Mary and their infant son, taken by the Collins gang in a raid that left nothing but ashes and graves. He'd rebuilt the ranch with his own hands, but some things, he'd learned, could never be restored. The cattle lowed plaintively ahead, their dark shapes moving slowly against the bleached landscape. Jacob counted them, 14 head, all accounted for. As he prepared to turn them back south, a different sound caught his attention. Voices, carried on the wind. Not English, but the rhythmic cadences of Apache tongue, mixed with something else, pain. Jacob's hand instinctively moved to his Winchester, though he didn't draw it from the saddle holster. He'd lived long enough in these parts to know that not every encounter meant violence, despite what the newspapers back east would have folks believe. Still, caution had kept him alive this long. Following the sounds over a low ridge, he came upon a scene that made his stomach tighten. 5 Apache lay scattered among the rocks, their bodies bearing the unmistakable marks of military carbines. The pursuit had been recent. Blood still seeped into the thirsty ground, and the acrid smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Border Patrol, most likely. They'd been increasing their sweep since the troubles at San Carlos. Movement caught his eye. A figure huddled behind a large boulder, trying to make itself small. Jacob dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, speaking in the limited Apache he'd learned from the old trading post keeper. "I mean no harm," he said, the words feeling clumsy on his tongue. The figure shifted, and he saw her then. A woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, though hardship had a way of aging folks prematurely out here. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around a face marked by exhaustion and fear. A threadbare blanket, more holes than fabric, was clutched around her thin shoulders. Her eyes, when they met his, held the wariness of a wounded animal. She didn't run, though every muscle in her body seemed coiled to do so. Perhaps she was too tired, or perhaps she'd simply run out of places to go. Jacob noticed the cuts on her bare feet, the way she favored her left side. "You're hurt," he said, switching to English, then gestured to himself and back to her, trying to convey his meaning. The woman watched him with those dark, calculating eyes. When he took a step closer, she pressed harder against the rock, but still didn't flee. It was then he noticed the others, 2 more women and an elderly man, all bearing injuries, all watching him with the same mixture of fear and desperate hope. The sun was sinking lower, and the desert night would bring its own dangers, cold that could kill as surely as any bullet. Coyotes and worse drawn to the scent of blood. Jacob made a decision that his neighbors would likely call foolish. "I have a cabin," he said slowly, pointing south. "Warm, food, medicine." He demonstrated by pulling his canteen from his saddle, taking a small sip, then offering it to her. The woman hesitated for a long moment before reaching out with a trembling hand. As she drank, the blanket shifted, revealing her shoulder, even from several feet away. Jacob could see the mark, raised scar tissue in a deliberate pattern. At first glance, it looked like the ritual markings he'd seen among some of the tribes, but something about it seemed wrong. Too uniform, too... The woman noticed his gaze and quickly pulled the blanket back into place, but not before he glimpsed the fear that flashed across her face. Not the wary caution from before, but something deeper, more haunted. Night was falling fast, painting the rocks in deepening purples and blacks. The temperature had already dropped 10 degrees, and would fall another 20 before midnight. The wounded Apache wouldn't survive without shelter. "Come," Jacob said, moving back to his horse, deliberately turning his back to show trust. Not far. It took another 10 minutes of patient coaxing, but eventually, the small group agreed to follow. The woman with the marked shoulder seemed to be their unofficial leader, or perhaps just the one with the most strength left. She helped the elderly man to his feet, supporting him with surprising gentleness. The journey back to Jacob's cabin was slow and painful. He'd given his horse to the old man, leading it on foot while the women walked alongside. The one with the scarred shoulder stayed close to the elder, occasionally speaking to him in soft Apache phrases that Jacob couldn't understand. His cabin appeared just as the last light faded from the sky, a modest structure of logs and mud chinking, with a stone chimney already releasing a thin trail of smoke from the banked fire he'd left that morning. It wasn't much, but it was solid, built to withstand both the desert heat and winter storms. The Apache hesitated at the threshold, and Jacob understood. To enter another's dwelling was an act of trust, especially for people who had every reason to distrust. He entered first, lighting the oil lamp and adding wood to the fire, letting the warm glow spill out into the darkness. One by one, they entered, the wounded helping each other, until all four were inside. The cabin, already small for one man, felt cramped with 5 people, but the warmth was welcome after the bitter cold outside. Jacob busied himself with practical matters, water heated for cleaning wounds, his small supply of medical goods brought out, food simple but plentiful. Salt pork and beans, hardtack soaked in broth to soften it, coffee strong enough to restore some strength. As he worked, he watched the woman with the scarred shoulder. She tended to the others first, cleaning and binding wounds with practiced efficiency despite her own injuries. When she finally sat near the fire, exhaustion written in every line of her body, the blanket again slipped from her shoulder, this time in the steady light of the oil lamp. Jacob saw the mark clearly. His breath caught. He'd seen brands before, on cattle, on horses. This was the same, human skin marked with hot iron, the tissue raised and puckered in a pattern that looked almost like a number or symbol. The woman saw him looking and quickly covered herself, but not before their eyes met. In that moment, he saw not just fear or wariness, but a deep, abiding shame that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Outside, a coyote howled, and the wind picked up, rattling the wooden shutters. Inside, 5 souls from 2 different worlds sat in the circle of firelight, bound together by the simple human needs for warmth and shelter against the cold desert night. Jacob added another log to the fire, watching the sparks rise up the chimney, and wondered what story that brand might tell, and whether he truly wanted to know. The morning came slowly, desert cold giving way to the promise of heat as pale light crept through the cabin's single window. Jacob had spent the night in his chair by the door, dozing fitfully, one ear always listening for trouble. The Apache had slept where exhaustion took them, the elderly man on the narrow cot Jacob had offered, the women wrapped in whatever blankets could be spared, huddled near the dying fire. He rose quietly, adding fresh wood to the embers and setting coffee to boil. The familiar morning ritual felt strange with others present. 5 years of solitude had made him forget the small considerations of shared space, moving quietly, being mindful of others' sleep. The woman with the scarred shoulder stirred first, in daylight. Jacob could see her more clearly. Her face, beneath the dirt and exhaustion, held a quiet dignity. High cheekbones, eyes the color of dark amber that watched him with that same careful wariness. She sat up slowly, favoring her left side where he suspected a rifle ball had grazed her ribs. "Morning," Jacob said softly. Pouring coffee into 2 tin cups, he offered her one, which she accepted after a moment's hesitation. They sat in silence as the others slowly woke. The elderly man, who the women called Nayati, seemed to have fared the worst. His breathing was labored, and when he tried to sit up, fresh blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his thigh. "That needs proper tending," Jacob said, gathering his medical supplies. "The bullet's still in there." The woman translated his words, and the old man nodded weakly as Jacob worked, cleaning and probing the wound with as much gentleness as his rough hands could manage. He became aware of the woman watching him intently. "You have done this before," she said suddenly in English. Her voice was low, hoarse from thirst and fatigue, but her pronunciation was clear. Jacob glanced up, surprised. "You speak English?" "The missionary school," she said, then pressed her lips together as if she'd revealed too much. He returned to his work, finally extracting the bullet and packing the wound with clean cloth. "There, should heal clean if we can keep the fever down." As he washed his hands in the basin, he felt her eyes on him. When he turned, she was looking at the photographs on the rough mantel. Mary in her wedding dress, the baby in her arms. "Your family?" she asked. "Were," Jacob said simply. "Raiders, 5 years ago." She nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for more words. Loss was a language spoken fluently in these lands. The morning passed with the mundane necessities of survival. Food prepared and eaten, wounds checked and redressed, water hauled from the well. The 2 other women, sisters, he learned, named Ayana and Chenoa, spoke little English but communicated their gratitude through gestures and careful smiles. It was near noon when Jacob finally asked what he'd been wondering since first seeing them. "The patrol. Why were they after you?" The woman's hand unconsciously went to her shoulder, fingers tracing the outline of the brand through the fabric. "We escaped," she said quietly. "From the town. From—" She paused, searching for words. "From those who would own us." Jacob felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard whispers of such things. Apache women taken in raids, sold to brothels or worse in the lawless border towns. But hearing it confirmed, seeing the evidence burned into her skin, made his stomach turn. "How long?" he asked. 2 seasons, she said, "since the soldiers came to our village. Said we were hostiles, killed the men, took the women and children." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the coffee cup. "They sold us in Massilia, like horses, like cattle." Jacob stood abruptly, needing to move, to do something with the anger building in his chest. He stepped outside, breathing deeply of the desert air. When he turned back, she had followed him, standing in the doorway. "I should not have spoken of it," she said. "You have shown kindness. I should not repay it with ugly truths." "No," Jacob said firmly. "Truth ain't ugly. What was done to you, that's ugly." He gestured to her shoulder. "That mark, it's not a tattoo," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "It's a brand from the auction." The words came out rushed, as if she needed to say them before courage failed. "So buyers would know which lot we came from, like your cattle." Jacob's hands clenched into fists. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his years on the frontier, but this, the systematic breaking of human beings, the marking of them like property, touched something deep and fierce within him. "The men who did this are powerful," she finished. "They have the law in their pockets. The soldiers look the other way. Some even help with the catching." She looked out at the vast landscape. "We ran because Nayati, he is my uncle, he found us, traded everything he had to men who would tell him where we were. But when we left, they followed. Bad for business. They said, if merchandise walks away." "What's your name?" Jacob asked suddenly, realizing he'd been thinking of her only as the woman with the brand. She hesitated. Then, "They called me Maria at the mission school, but my true name is Elisa. Elisa Birdsong." "Jacob McAllister," he replied. "And Elisa, those men, they won't take you while you're under my roof. That's a promise." She studied his face for a long moment. "You are one man. They are many." "Maybe so, but this is my land, my home, And I've got neighbors who might be persuaded to help. The sheriff in Tucson is a fair man, not like those border town lawmen." He paused, thinking. "You could testify, tell what was done. It might—" "No." The word was sharp, frightened. "You do not understand. Apache word against white men, they would say we are lying, say we are runaway servants who stole from our employers. And then—" She shuddered. "The punishment for runaways is severe." Jacob wanted to argue, to say that justice would prevail, but the words died in his throat. He knew she was right. He'd seen how Apache testimony was dismissed in court, how the law bent and twisted when powerful men had interests to protect. "Then what?" he asked. "You can't run forever." "We thought to reach the mountains, find others of our people. Start again." She looked back at the cabin where her uncle lay wounded, her cousins weak from their ordeal. "But now?" "Now you rest," Jacob said firmly. "Heal, get your strength back. Time enough to figure the rest when you're not likely to collapse from exhaustion." She nodded slowly, and he saw the first crack in her defensive walls, a glimmer of hope, perhaps, or at least a temporary surrender to necessity. That evening, as they shared another simple meal, Jacob found himself watching Elisa as she helped her uncle eat, speaking to him softly in Apache. There was a grace to her movements despite her injuries, a quiet strength that reminded him of the desert itself, enduring, resilient, beautiful in its harsh way. When she caught him looking, he didn't turn away. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Your wife?" "No." He considered his words. "My mother. Maybe she was strong like you. Came out from Ohio as a new bride, buried 3 children on the trail. Still managed to smile when my father built our first sadi." He smiled at the memory. Said the only way to survive the frontier was to be too stubborn to die. For the first time since he'd found them. Elisa smiled, just a small quirk of her lips, but it transformed her face. "Stubborn, yes, Apache women know this." As night fell again and they prepared for sleep, Jacob made a decision. "Tomorrow, I'll ride to the Garrett place. Tom Garrett's a good man, and his wife Susan knows some doctoring. They'll help, and won't ask questions that don't need asking." Elisa looked uncertain. "More white people. Good people," Jacob corrected gently. "The kind who judge a person by their actions, not their blood." He met her eyes. "The West is changing. Elisa, not fast enough, maybe, and not everywhere. But there are folks trying to build something better. Something where that brand on your shoulder becomes nothing but an old scar from an uglier time." She said nothing, but as she wrapped herself in her blanket near the fire, he thought he saw her touch her shoulder again, not in shame this time, but thoughtfully, as if considering whether such a future was possible. Outside, the desert night sang its ancient songs, wind through rock, distant coyote calls, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Inside, 2 wounded souls sat by the fire, each nursing their own scars, perhaps finding in each other's company the first fragile threads of something that might, with time and care, weave itself into hope. The journey south began 3 days later, when Nayate's fever had broken and the worst of the wounds had begun to heal. Jacob had returned from the Garrett ranch with borrowed horses and supplies, along with Susan Garrett's assurance that she'd check on them in a week's time. Tom Garrett had listened to Jacob's carefully edited story with knowing eyes, but asked no pressing questions, simply nodding and saying, "A man's got a right to help folks in need." The morning sky hung gray and heavy with the promise of rain, unusual for this time of year. But welcome. Jacob led the way on his bay gelding, while Elisa rode beside him on a gentle mare. Behind them, Nayate shared a horse with Ayana, while Chenoa managed her own mount with surprising skill. They followed the old stage road at first, then cut west toward Jacob's ranch through a landscape of scattered juniper and stretches of grama grass turned brown by the long, dry season. The San Pedro River ran low in its banks, little more than a trickle in some places, but still a ribbon of life through the desert. "Your land is far?" Elisa asked, her English growing more confident with each day of use. "Another day's ride," Jacob replied. We'll camp tonight at Skeleton Canyon. There's a good spring there, and shelter if this rain comes." She nodded, then fell silent. He'd learned her patterns over the past days, long stretches of quiet, punctuated by unexpected questions or observations. She watched everything with those amber eyes, missing nothing. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat. The promised rain hadn't materialized, but the clouds provided blessed relief from the usual blazing sun. As Jacob distributed hard biscuits and dried meat, he noticed Elisa standing apart, staring back the way they'd come. "Worried about pursuit?" he asked. "Joining her?" "Always," she admitted. "In that place, they said we were valuable property. Men do not like to lose what they consider valuable." "Been 3 days. If they were coming, they'd have come by now." She shook her head. "You do not know them. Patient men. They wait. Let you think you are safe. Then," she made a sharp gesture. Jacob studied her profile, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her hand never strayed far from the knife he'd given her. "What will you do, when you're healed and safe?" "Safe," she repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. "I do not know this anymore." She turned to face him. "You ask what I will do. I ask you, why do you help us? Truth now, not the polite words." The directness caught him off guard. He found himself answering with equal honesty. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. Because—" He paused, surprised by his own words. "Because you remind me that there's still something worth fighting for out here." She absorbed this quietly. "Your wife. You loved her very much." "I did do, but she's gone, and I've spent 5 years just existing, going through the motions. Then I found you all, and suddenly there was something that needed doing. Someone who needed help. Made me feel alive again, I suppose." "And this is enough? To risk your life for strangers?" "Apache strangers, you mean?" He smiled wryly. "My neighbors would say I'm a fool. Some already do. But Mary, she would have done the same. She had a way of seeing people as just people." They resumed their journey as the afternoon wore on. The trail led them through a series of shallow canyons where the rock walls showed the ancient marks of water that had carved them over millennia. Elisa began to share small pieces of her story, her childhood before the mission school, learning traditional skills from her grandmother, the confusion and pain of being caught between two worlds. "They wanted to make us white," she said, touching her long hair, which the mission had forbidden her to cut in traditional Apache fashion. "Punished us for speaking our language, told us our ways were savage, but then they sold us like animals, which is truly savage." As evening approached, they reached Skeleton Canyon. True to its name, the bones of some long-dead cattle were scattered near the entrance, bleached white by years of sun, but further in, where a spring fed a small pool. Grass grew green and cottonwoods provided shade. They made camp efficiently, everyone falling into roles without need for discussion. Jacob tended the horses while Elisa and her cousins gathered wood and nayati, still weak but improving, prepared a simple meal with their supplies. As darkness fell, they sat around the fire. The clouds had thickened, and the smell of rain was strong in the air. Chenoa sang softly in Apache, a traveling song. Elisa explained, asking the spirits for protection on the journey. "My grandmother knew 100 songs," Elisa said. "Songs for every occasion, healing songs, war songs, songs to bring rain, songs to quiet babies. I remember only a few." There was deep sadness in her voice. "Another thing they took from us." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. They moved under the relative shelter of an overhanging rock, the fire hissing as drops found their way through. "Tell me about your ranch," Elisa said suddenly. "What is it like?" Jacob leaned back against the rock wall, remembering. "It's nothing fancy. A cabin bigger than the line shack where I found you, but not by much. Good well water, a barn that needs repair, Seems there's always something needs fixing. About 200 head of cattle. Some horses. Sits in a valley with good grass. Mountains to the north. You built it yourself. Me and Mary, yeah. Well, I built it. She made it a home. Garden out back, though it's gone to seed now. She had curtains on the windows, red checked cloth. Probably should have taken them down. But, he shrugged. But they remind you of her. Everything reminds me of her. But yeah, especially those. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of increasing rain and the soft voices of the sisters talking with their uncle. Jacob found himself studying Elisa's face in the firelight, the way shadows and flame played across her features. "You have not asked," she said suddenly. "Asked what?" "What they did. At that place. Most men would want to know. Would imagine." Her voice carried a bitter edge. "Not my business unless you want it to be." Jacob said firmly, "What matters is you survived it. You're here now. The rest is your story to tell or keep as you choose." She turned to look at him fully then, something shifting in her expression. "You are not like other white men I have known. I'll take that as a compliment. It is meant as one." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your Mary was fortunate. I was the fortunate one." The rain intensified, becoming a steady downpour that turned the canyon entrance into a curtain of water. They'd be trapped here until it eased, but the spring would run fresh and full tomorrow, and the grass would green for their journey's end. "When we reach your ranch," Elisa began, then stopped. "You'll be welcome as long as you need." Jacob finished. "All of you. Until you're ready to move on. If you want to move on. And your neighbors, they will not welcome Apache on white man's land. Then they'll have to take that up with me. My land. My choice." He met her eyes. "I meant what I said. You're under my protection now. That means something where I come from." She nodded slowly, and he saw that glimmer again. Not quite trust. Not yet, but the possibility of it, like the first green shoots after a fire, fragile but determined. As the night deepened and the rain drummed on, they talked of smaller things, the best way to doctor a colicky horse, the signs that promised a hard winter, the names of stars in both their languages. And when Elisa finally dozed off, her head tilting to rest against the rock wall, Jacob carefully draped his coat over her shoulders. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, and in sleep. Some of the constant tension eased from her face. For the first time, he could see the woman she might have been in a kinder world, and perhaps the woman she might yet become, given time and space to heal. The storm passed near dawn, leaving the world washed clean and new, as the first light touched the canyon walls, painting them gold and rose. Jacob knew that something had shifted in the night. Not love, too soon for that, and too much pain between them and such possibilities. But understanding, perhaps, recognition of one scarred soul by another. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The McAllister Ranch appeared just as the sun reached its zenith, nestled in a valley between two low ridges like something cradled in the earth's palm. Jacob felt an unexpected tightness in his throat as they crested the final rise. 5 years he'd lived here alone, and now he was bringing strangers, Apache strangers, into Mary's home. "There it is," he said simply. The cabin stood solid and weathered, logs gone silver gray with age. The barn leaned slightly eastward, testament to last winter's fierce winds. Cattle grazed in the middle distance, scattered like dark stones across the yellowed grass. It wasn't much to look at, certainly nothing compared to the big spreads owned by men like Colonel Bradshaw or the Redding brothers. But it was his. Elisa studied the scene with those careful eyes. "It is good land," she said finally. "Protected. Water near. Your wife chose well." "We chose together," Jacob corrected gently. As they rode down the slope, he could already see the signs of his absence. A section of fence down where the cattle had pushed through. Tumbleweed caught against the porch, the garden gate hanging askew. Work to be done. Always work to be done. They were still a quarter-mile from the cabin when the riders appeared. 3 men, coming from the direction of town. their horses kicking up dust clouds that hung in the still air. Jacob recognized them immediately. His nearest neighbor, Carl Hendricks, along with his two sons, Matthew and Peter. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle, though he didn't draw it. "Company," he said quietly to Elisa. "My neighbors, stay calm." Carl Hendricks was a big man, barrel-chested and red-faced from years under the desert sun. He reined up 20 yards away, his sons flanking him. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but Jacob could see the way their eyes tracked over his companions, lingering on the women, on Nayate's obvious Apache features. "Jacob," Carl said, nodding. "Heard you were bringing visitors. News travels fast," Jacob replied evenly. "Carl, boys, what brings you out this way?" "Concern for a neighbor," Carl said, but his attention was fixed on Elisa. "Tom Garrett mentioned you'd found some folks in trouble." "I did. They're under my protection now." Matthew Hendricks, younger and hotter-headed than his father, shifted in his saddle. "Apache. Looks like. You sure that's wise? McAllister, after what they did to the Simmons family last spring?" "That was Chiricahua raiders from Mexico," Jacob said, his voice hardening. "These folks are peaceful. They've been through enough without adding false accusations to their troubles." "Peaceful," Peter echoed skeptically. "That's what they all say until they steal your horses and burn your barn." Elisa stirred beside Jacob, and he could feel her tension like a physical thing. But when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "We are not thieves. We are not raiders. We seek only shelter while we heal." Carl's eyebrows rose. "It speaks English. Mission Apache. Then, she has a name," Jacob said coldly. "And yes, she was educated at the mission schools. They all were. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've been riding since dawn and need to get these folks settled." He started to move past, but Carl held up a hand. "Now hold on. Jacob, we're just looking out for the community. You bring Apache onto your land. That affects all of us. What's to stop more of them from coming? What's to stop them from seeing this as weakness? What's to stop us from being human beings?" Jacob countered. "These people were ambushed. Carl, shot down like dogs. The women were—" He stopped, unwilling to share Elisa's story without her permission. "They need help, that's all. And when they're healed, what then? Then they'll decide their own path. Until then, they're my guests." Carl studied him for a long moment. "Mary wouldn't have wanted this. Jacob, bringing danger to her home." The words hit like a physical blow, but Jacob's expression didn't change. "Mary would have been the first to offer help. You didn't know her well if you think otherwise." "Maybe so." Carl gathered his reins. "But you mark my words. This won't end well. Apache is Apache. Mission taught or not. You're inviting trouble into all our lives." He looked once more at Elisa, something unreadable in his expression. "You especially, Miss, ought to know better. Your kind and ours don't mix. Never have, never will." With that, the three men wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and unspoken threats in their wake. Jacob watched them go, jaw tight. "I apologize for that. Carl means well, in his way, but—" "He spoke truth," Elisa interrupted. "We are trouble for you. Perhaps we should—" "You should get inside and rest." Jacob said firmly, "This is my land, my choice. Carl Hendricks doesn't speak for me." They made their way to the cabin in subdued silence. Jacob helped Nayate down from his horse, noting with concern how the old man swayed on his feet. The confrontation had taken its toll on all of them, reminding them how precarious their situation truly was. The cabin's interior was dusty but intact. Mary's red-checked curtains still hung at the windows, faded now but cheerful. Her rocking chair sat by the cold fireplace, a basket of long-abandoned mending beside it. Jacob had to turn away from the sight. "It is a good home," Elisa said softly. "I can feel her presence still." "Make yourselves comfortable," Jacob managed. "I'll see to the horses and get a fire going." The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. Beds were made up. The thick layer of dust swept away. Water hauled from the well. Ayana and Chenoa proved efficient helpers, seeming to understand without being told what needed doing. They worked in near silence, but Jacob caught the occasional glance between them. Worry, uncertainty, but also a fragile hope. As evening approached, Elisa joined him on the porch. She'd washed the trail dust away and rebraided her hair, and in the soft light she looked younger, less guarded. "Your neighbor was right about one thing," she said without preamble. "This will bring you trouble. Men like him, they see Apache and see only enemies. It does not matter that we have done nothing wrong." "Carl's scared," Jacob said. "Lost a brother to Comanche raiders back in Texas. Never got over it. Sees threats everywhere now. And the others? Your other neighbors. Some will be like Carl. Some won't care as long as you don't bother them. A few might even be welcoming." He paused. "Town might be different. Depends on whether Sheriff Morrison is still keeping the peace or if he's let the council push him around again." She absorbed this quietly. "Then, why did you not tell him about what was done to us? It might have made him more sympathetic." Jacob turned to look at her. "That's your story to tell or keep, not mine to use as a bargaining chip." Something passed over her face. Surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he couldn't read. "You continue to puzzle me. Jacob McAllister." "How so?" "You have power here, land, respect, the right skin color, yet you risk it for us. For me." She touched her shoulder unconsciously, where the brand lay hidden. "Even knowing what I am, what I was—" "You're a woman who survived something terrible," Jacob said firmly. "That's what you are. Nothing more, nothing less." She studied him for a long moment. "I think I understand now why your wife loved you." The words caught him off guard, bringing a rush of grief and something else, a warmth he hadn't felt in 5 years. Before he could respond, Nayati called from inside, needing assistance, and the moment passed. That night, as they shared their first meal in the ranch house, venison stew from Jacob's smokehouse, biscuits that Elisa had somehow made light and fluffy despite the old stove's quirks, he found himself watching her interact with her family. She translated conversations, ensured everyone had enough to eat, checked Nayati's bandages with gentle hands. There was a natural grace to her movements, a quiet strength that drew the eye. After dinner, as the women cleaned up, refusing his help with gentle firmness, Jacob stepped outside to check the stock. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the desert sky. He was surprised when Elisa joined him a few minutes later. "Couldn't sleep. Not yet. Too many new sounds. Too much space." She wrapped her arms around herself. "In that place, we slept in a room no bigger than your pantry. 6 of us, the open fields, exposed." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, cattle lowing softly, a distant coyote, the whisper of wind through grass. "Tomorrow I'll ride to the Garrett place," Jacob said. "Let them know we arrived safely. Tom promised to speak to some of the others. Try to smooth things over. And if they will not be smoothed, then we deal with that when it comes." He glanced at her. "This isn't your first time dealing with hostile neighbors, I'm guessing." A bitter smile touched her lips. "No. At the mission, in the towns. Always there were those who saw us as less than human. But here," she gestured at the vast landscape, "here I thought might be different. Foolish. Not foolish. Hopeful. That's different." "Hope," she repeated softly. "Another luxury I had forgotten." As if by mutual agreement, they turned back toward the cabin. At the door, Elisa paused. "Jacob, thank you for everything, for seeing us as people, for—" She stopped, searching for words. "For reminding me that not all whites are the same, just as not all Apache are the same." "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow brings its own challenges." She nodded and slipped inside. Jacob remained on the porch a moment longer, looking out at his land, their land now, at least temporarily. Change was coming. He could feel it. The comfortable solitude of his grief was ending, replaced by something more complex, more dangerous, but infinitely more alive. Inside, he could hear the soft murmur of Apache voices, the creak of floorboards as his guests settled for the night. For the first time in 5 years, the cabin felt like a home again. Not the home it had been with Mary, but something new, something still taking shape. He thought of Carl's warning, of the troubles that likely lay ahead. But he thought too of Elisa's amber eyes, of the way she'd said hope, like she was tasting honey after years of bitter herbs. Whatever came next, he would face it. They would face it. Together. The sandstorm struck without warning 3 weeks after their arrival at the ranch. Jacob had seen the signs, the restless cattle, the strange yellow tinge to the southern sky, but hadn't expected the full fury that descended upon them. It began as a distant wall of brown, rolling across the desert like some biblical plague. Within minutes, the air turned thick and choking, sand driven horizontal by screaming winds that threatened to tear the roof from the cabin. "Get everything inside!" Jacob shouted over the rising howl. "Secure the shutters!" They worked frantically, Elisa and her cousins helping drive the horses into the barn, while Jacob struggled to close the heavy wooden shutters against the assault. Nayati, still weak but mobile now, stuffed rags into the gaps under doors, trying to keep the worst of the sand at bay. By the time they were all inside, the world beyond the walls had disappeared into a roaring brown chaos. Sand found every crack and crevice, coating surfaces within minutes despite their efforts. The oil lamps flickered in the strange drafts, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "How long will it last?" Ayana asked in halting English, clutching her sister's hand. "Could be hours," Jacob admitted. "Maybe through the night. These autumn storms are unpredictable." They settled in to wait. The 5 of them crowded into the main room. Jacob had brought in extra water and supplies earlier, a habit born of years in this harsh land. As the storm raged, he found himself grateful for the company. Previous storms he'd weathered alone, with only memories and whiskey for companionship. Elisa worked at keeping everyone calm, suggesting they tell stories to pass the time. Chenoa sang softly in Apache, her voice somehow carrying over the wind's fury. Nayati spoke of the old days, before the coming of the whites, when his people moved freely with the seasons. As the hours wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, Jacob noticed Eliza growing increasingly agitated. She paced the small space, flinching at each gust that shook the cabin. Finally, she retreated to the corner near the fireplace, arms wrapped tightly around herself. He moved to sit near her, not speaking, just offering his presence. After a moment, she said quietly, "The sound, it reminds me of what? The room where they kept us. When sandstorms came, they would lock us in. No light, no water, just the sound of sand against walls and our own fear." Her voice was barely audible. "Some girls would cry. They would beat us for crying." Jacob felt the familiar anger rise in his chest. "You're safe now? This cabin has weathered worse storms than this." She looked at him, eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Am I safe? As safe as I can make you." She seemed about to say more when a particularly violent gust shook the entire structure. In the corner, one of the shutters gave way with a sharp crack. Sand and wind burst through the opening like a living thing. "The bedroom!" Jacob shouted. "Everyone into the bedroom!" They scrambled to gather essentials, water, blankets, the oil lamp, and crowded into the cabin's single bedroom. Jacob slammed the door behind them and shoved a dresser against it for good measure. The room was cramped with 5 people, but the walls were thicker here, the single window smaller and more secure. In the close quarters, by the light of the single lamp, and strange intimacy developed. They sat on the floor, backs against the walls, listening to the storm rage beyond their shelter. Elisa ended up beside Jacob, their shoulders touching. "This is how the world ends," Chenoa whispered in Apache. Elisa translated, adding, "She has always feared storms. Tell her the world has ended many times." Jacob said, "For your people, for mine. But we're still here, still fighting. That's what matters." As Elisa translated, he saw something shift in her expression, A recognition, perhaps, of shared endurance. When she was done, she said, "You speak as one who knows loss. We all know loss out here. It's what we do with it that counts." The storm raged on, but gradually the wind's shriek lessened. In the small room, a different kind of atmosphere developed. Nayati dozed, head nodding against his chest. The sisters huddled together, taking comfort in each other's presence. "Tell me about before," Elisa said suddenly. "Before your loss, what was it like?" Jacob considered. "Ordinary, beautiful in its ordinariness. Mary would wake before dawn to start bread. I'd milk the cow. We had a milk cow then, and we'd eat breakfast as the sun came up. She'd talk about expanding the garden, maybe getting chickens. I'd complain about fence repairs or difficult calves. Normal things. You were happy. We were. Not every minute. We had our struggles. Money was tight, work was hard. But yes, happy." He paused. "What about you? Before the school? Before everything? Were you happy?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I remember gathering piñon nuts with my grandmother. She would tell stories while we worked, about Coyote and his tricks, about the hero twins. My hands would be sticky with sap, and she would laugh and call me her little pine tree." The smile faded. "She died the winter before the soldiers came. Perhaps it was mercy. She did not see what we became. You became survivors," Jacob said firmly. "Nothing to be ashamed of in that." She turned to look at him fully, in the lamplight, with sand still filtering through invisible cracks to dance in the air between them. She seemed both ancient and young. "Sometimes survival feels like its own kind of death, like we left our true selves behind and walk now as ghosts. I know that feeling." The words came out rougher than intended. "After Mary died, I thought about ending it. Even had the gun loaded, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Figured I'd see one last pretty sky and then join her." "What stopped you?" He thought about it. Stubbornness, maybe. Or cowardice. Or maybe I heard Mary's voice telling me I had work to do still. Don't know. But I put the gun away and got up the next morning and the next. And here we are. "Here we are," she echoed. "Two ghosts pretending to be alive. Maybe that's how it starts," Jacob said. "Pretending. And maybe one day we wake up and realize we stopped pretending somewhere along the way." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something passing between them. Understanding. Recognition. The faint stirring of possibility. Then she leaned back against the wall, her shoulder pressing slightly more firmly against his. They sat in silence as the storm gradually spent itself. The wind's howl diminished to a moan, then to whispers. When Jacob finally ventured to crack open the door, sand cascaded in. But the worst had passed. The main room was a disaster. Sand covering everything, the broken shutter letting in drifts like snow. But the cabin stood. They had endured. As they emerged, beginning the long process of cleaning and repair, Jacob caught Elisa's arm gently. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me with your memories." She looked at the sand-covered room, at her family already beginning to sweep and clean, then back at him. "Thank you for sharing yours. It helps to know that you're not alone in it." "Yes," she squeezed his hand briefly, then moved to help her cousins. They worked through the night and into the next day, restoring order to the chaos. The broken shutter was patched, the sand swept out, the animals checked and tended. By evening, exhausted but victorious, they gathered for a meal of beans and salt pork. "In my grandmother's stories," Elisa said as they ate, "storms often brought change, cleared away the old to make room for the new." "Your grandmother sounds like she was wise," Jacob said. "She was. I think she would have liked you." Elisa paused, then added quietly, "I think I am beginning to like you too. Jacob McAllister." The words were simple, almost casual, but Jacob felt their weight. In the lamplight, surrounded by her family, with the evidence of their shared battle against the storm still visible in the corners where sand lingered. Something had shifted between them. Not love, not yet. Too much pain. Too much past for that. But connection, understanding. The first green shoots of something that might, given time and care, grow into something stronger. Outside, the desert night was calm. Stars visible through the window Mary had once hung with those red-checked curtains. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp, and, inside, two wounded souls sat at the same table, sharing food and quiet conversation, no longer quite as alone as they had been. It was, Jacob thought, a beginning. The news came with Tom Garrett on a cold morning in late October. Jacob was repairing the barn door when he saw the dust of an approaching rider. Elisa, who had been helping him hold the boards, tensed immediately. "It's all right," Jacob said. "That's Tom's roan mare." But Tom's face as he dismounted told a different story. The usual easy smile was absent, replaced by grim lines of worry. "Jacob," he said, nodding to Elisa. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I bring troubling news." Jacob set down his hammer. "Let's hear it. There's men in town asking questions. 3 of them, claiming to be lawmen from Massilia. They're looking for escaped." Tom glanced at Elisa, then continued carefully. "Escaped servants. Apache women who allegedly stole from their employers." Elisa's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. "They are not lawmen. They are hunters, slave catchers." Tom nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Sheriff Morrison's been keeping them at bay, asking for proper papers, but he can't hold them off forever. They're offering rewards. Jacob, big money for information. And folks are tempted. Some are. Carl Hendricks was in town yesterday. I didn't like the look on his face when those men were talking." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "They're saying they'll be riding out to the ranches soon, checking for their property." Jacob felt Elisa sway slightly beside him and steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "How long do we have?" "Day or 2, maybe. Morrison's doing what he can. But if they have legal papers, legal." Elisa spat the word. "Written by men who profit from suffering." After Tom left, promising to send word if anything changed. Jacob found Elisa standing by the corral, staring at the horizon. Her cousins and uncle were inside, unaware of the danger closing in. "We should leave," she said without turning. "Tonight, before we bring more trouble to you." "No!" She wheeled to face him. "You do not understand. These men, they will not stop. They have invested too much. And if they cannot take us, they will destroy you for harboring us. Let them try." Jacob's voice was harder than he intended. "I've made my choice. Elisa, I won't turn you out to face them alone." "Why?" The word came out almost as a cry. "Why do you care what happens to us? To me?" The question hung between them in the cold morning air. Jacob looked at her, really looked at her. Weeks of good food and safety had restored some of her health, but the haunted look never fully left her eyes. She was beautiful in the way the desert was beautiful. Harsh, enduring, touched by both cruelty and grace. Because somewhere between finding you by those rocks and watching you help rebuild after that storm, you stopped being strangers, he said quietly. Because when I see you with your family, teaching Ayana English or caring for Nayati, I remember what it means to have something worth protecting, because... He paused, then spoke the truth. Because you've made me feel alive again. Elisa Birdsong. She stared at him, amber eyes wide. Then, without warning, she began to cry, not the gentle tears of sentiment, but harsh, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. Jacob stepped forward instinctively, and she fell against him, her hands clutching his shirt. "I am so tired," she whispered against his chest, "so tired of running, of being afraid, of being less than human in their eyes." He held her, one hand gentle on her hair, feeling the tremors that ran through her. "Then stop running. Make a stand here with me." She pulled back to look up at him. "They will come with guns, with papers, with the law on their side. Maybe, but I've got friends too. Tom Garrett, Susan, Sheriff Morrison. Others who believe in what's right over what's legal." He cupped her face gently. "And I've got something they don't expect. A stubborn rancher who's got nothing left to lose except the people he's come to care about. She searched his face, then reached up to touch the scar on his jaw, an old mark from a horse's hoof years ago. My grandmother said that scars are the map of our journey. Yours tell of honest work, mine. She touched her shoulder where the brand lay hidden. Mine tell only of shame. No, Jacob said firmly. They tell of survival, of strength, of a woman who endured the unendurable and still finds the courage to care for others. Something shifted in her expression then. A wall crumbling. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. Soft, tentative, tasting of tears and possibility. When she pulled back, both were breathing unsteadily. I should not have done that, she whispered. I'm glad you did. They stood there for a moment longer. The world narrowed to just the two of them. Then reality reasserted itself. They had preparations to make, a family to protect, a storm of a different kind approaching. That night, as they gathered to discuss their options, the atmosphere was tense. Nayati, when told of the threat, simply nodded. I am too old to run again. If they come, I will face them. We fight, Ayana said in her improving English. Together. Jacob spread a rough map on the table. If we need to run, there are places to hide. The box canyon to the north, only one way in. Easy to defend. Or we could make for Fort Apache. The army there won't look kindly on slave traders, regardless of their papers. And if we stay? Elisa asked. Then we make ready. Check weapons. Prepare defenses. Hope Morrison can delay them long enough for us to gather support. As they planned, Jacob was struck by the change in the dynamics. No longer was he the protector and they the protected. They were partners now, united in purpose. Elisa translated rapidly between English and Apache, her mind quick to grasp tactical advantages. Her cousins volunteered to keep watch in shifts. Even Nayati, despite his age, began preparing ammunition. Later, as the others slept, Jacob found Elisa on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. He sat beside her, and she leaned into him naturally. I'm frightened, she admitted, but also grateful to face this with friends rather than alone. More than friends, I think, Jacob said quietly. She turned to look at him. Is that what we are becoming? In my culture, such things are not rushed. There are ceremonies, family negotiations, and in mine, a man courts a woman properly, calls on Sundays, brings flowers, asks her father's permission. He smiled wryly. But nothing about this situation is proper or usual. No, she agreed. But perhaps that frees us to make our own way. They sat in silence, watching clouds scud across the moon. Finally, Elisa spoke again. If we survive this, Jacob McAllister, I would like to know you in peaceful times, to see who we might be without fear driving us. When we survive this, he corrected. And yes, I'd like that too. She smiled then, the first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, revealing the woman she might have been in a kinder world. You have much faith for a man who has known loss. Loss taught me that life is short and precious, that when something good comes along, you hold on to it with both hands. Is that what I am? Something good? He turned to face her fully. You're the best thing that's come into my life in 5 years. Elisa, you and your family. You've turned my tomb of a home back into a place of living. You've reminded me that there's still beauty worth fighting for in this hard world. She kissed him again then, deeper this time, with the desperation of those who know tomorrow is promised to no one. When they finally parted, both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Come inside, Jacob said. Tomorrow will bring what it brings. Tonight, we rest and gather our strength. As they entered the cabin, Elisa paused. Jacob, whatever happens, I want you to know you gave me back my humanity. After so long being treated as property, you saw me as a person. That is a gift beyond measure. He squeezed her hand. You were always a person. Elisa, you just needed reminding. Same as me. They parted at her bedroom door. propriety still holding despite the kiss they'd shared. But as Jacob lay in his own bed, he felt the change in the air. Love had crept up on them like dawn in the desert, slowly, then all at once. And tomorrow, they would fight for the chance to see where that love might lead. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, but inside the cabin, 5 souls rested, no longer strangers but family, bound by choice and circumstance and the fragile hope of love discovered in the shadow of danger. The courthouse in Tucson stood like a fortress of justice against the desert sky, its adobe walls baked golden by years of sun. Jacob helped Elisa down from the wagon, feeling the tremor in her hands despite her composed expression. Behind them, Tom Garrett assisted Nayati while Susan Garrett stayed close to Ayana and Chenoa. "You don't have to do this," Jacob said quietly. "We could still—" "No." Elisa's voice was firm. "Running ends today. Either we win our freedom through law, or—" She didn't finish, but her meaning was clear. Sheriff Morrison met them at the entrance, his weathered face grim. "They're already inside. 3 of them. Plus Carl Hendricks and 2 other locals who claim to have information. Judge Wheeler's presiding. He's fair, but he follows the law to the letter." The courtroom was fuller than Jacob had expected. Word had spread about the unusual case, and townsfolk filled the benches, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and prejudice. The 3 men from Massilia sat at the plaintiff's table, well-dressed, confident, papers spread before them like weapons. The lead man, who'd introduced himself as Marcus Donovan, was smooth as snake oil, with cold eyes that lingered too long on Elisa. Beside him sat his partners, a thin man with pockmarked skin and a younger fellow whose hand never strayed far from his sidearm. Judge Wheeler, elderly but sharp-eyed, called the proceeding to order. "This is a hearing to determine the status of certain individuals claimed as runaway property. Mr. Donovan, present your case." Donovan rose smoothly. "Your Honor, these Apache women were legally purchased at public auction in Massilia. I have the bills of sale here." He produced papers with official-looking seals. "They were bought to work as domestic servants but fled their employment, stealing valuable items in the process. We seek only the return of legal property." Jacob felt Elisa tense beside him as Donovan continued, describing them as if they were livestock, noting their ages, physical conditions, even mentioning the brands that marked them as auction goods. The casual dehumanization made Jacob's blood boil. "And what proof do you have that these are the same women?" Judge Wheeler asked. "The brands, Your Honor. Each lot from that particular auction was marked. The woman calling herself Elisa bears the mark of Lot 7. I supervised that marking myself." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some nodded as if this made perfect sense. Others shifted uncomfortably. When Donovan finished, Judge Wheeler turned to the defense table. "Who speaks for these individuals?" Jacob started to rise, but Elisa placed a hand on his arm and stood herself. "I speak for myself, Your Honor, in English. As you can hear, I am not property. I am a person. The court recognizes Miss—" The judge paused. "Birdsong. Elisa Birdsong. And yes, I bear the mark Mr. Donovan speaks of." She pulled down her collar slightly, revealing the top of the scar. "But it is not a sign of ownership. It is evidence of a crime." The prosecutor smirked. "Your Honor, whether the woman likes her situation is irrelevant. The sale was legal under territorial law." "Legal?" Elisa's voice rose. "We were taken in a military raid. Our men killed, our children scattered. We were sold like animals to men who—" She stopped, composed herself. "Who did things no law should permit." "Do you have proof of these allegations?" Judge Wheeler asked. Not unkindly. "I have this," Elisa said, and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, she produced a piece of paper, creased and worn. A letter from Lieutenant James Morrison, Sheriff Morrison's son, who participated in the raid. He wrote to his father of his shame, of how women and children were taken not as prisoners of war, but as plunder. Sheriff Morrison stood. "That's my son's writing, Your Honor. He died last year. But he told me of that day. Said it haunted him. Said what they did wasn't war, but theft. The courtroom erupted in voices. Donovan's face darkened. Your Honor, this is hearsay. It's evidence. A new voice said from the gallery. An elderly white woman stood, leaning on a cane. I'm Margaret Stoddard. I ran the mission school where Elisa studied. I can testify that she came to us as a free person, not property. The raid that took her happened after she'd left our care. More witnesses began to stand. Tom Garrett spoke of the condition in which the women were found. Susan Garrett, with quiet authority, described the injuries consistent with harsh treatment. Even the town doctor, summoned by Sheriff Morrison, testified about scars and marks that suggested abuse. But it was the final witness who shifted the tide. A Mexican trader named Eduardo Vega, who'd traveled from Massilia at his own expense, stood nervously. I know these men, he said, indicating Donovan's group. They run what they call an employment agency. But everyone knows the truth. They buy Apache women taken in illegal raids and sell them to... He paused, choosing his words carefully. To establishments where no decent woman would work voluntarily. That's a lie, Donovan snarled, but Judge Wheeler banged his gavel. You'll have your chance to respond. Mr. Donovan, continue. Mr. Vega. Vega produced his own papers. I have here testimonies from women who escaped from these men. Stories of being branded, beaten, forced into situations. He handed the papers to the judge. Your Honor, what these men do is not employment. It is slavery by another name. The judge reviewed the papers, his face growing stonier with each page. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Donovan, these are serious allegations. How do you respond? Donovan stood, his smooth demeanor cracking. Your Honor, we operate within the law. If these women choose to interpret their employment contracts negatively... Employment contracts? Elisa interrupted. Show me where I signed anything. Show me where any of us agreed to be sold and branded and... Her voice broke slightly. Jacob reached for her hand under the table, and she gripped it tightly. The woman is emotional, Your Honor, Donovan said dismissively. Perhaps her current protector has filled her head with ideas above her station. That was a mistake. Judge Wheeler's eyes flashed. Mr. Donovan, I'll thank you to remember that in my courtroom. All who come before me are treated with respect. The proceedings continued for 2 more hours. More witnesses, more documents, increasingly desperate arguments from Donovan's side. Finally, Judge Wheeler called for silence. I've heard enough, he said. The question before me is whether these women are property to be returned or free persons with rights under the law. He looked at Elisa. Miss Birdsong, please stand. Elisa rose, still holding Jacob's hand. Can you read and write? Yes, Your Honor, in English and Spanish, and some Apache symbols. Have you ever committed a crime? No, Your Honor, unless seeking freedom is a crime. The judge nodded slowly. It is not in this territory. He turned to Donovan. Sir, your papers may be official, but they document an abomination. The buying and selling of human beings, regardless of their race, violates both natural law and the principles upon which this nation was founded. Your Honor, Donovan protested. The law clearly states... The law's evolving, Mr. Donovan, and where it falls short of justice, it is the duty of this court to interpret it in light of human dignity. Judge Wheeler's voice grew stern. I find that these women are not and never were legal property. They are free persons who were unlawfully detained and abused. Furthermore, he paused, letting the moment build. I find probable cause to charge you and your associates with kidnapping, assault, and human trafficking. The courtroom exploded. Donovan lunged forward, shouting about appeals and connections. But Sheriff Morrison and his deputies were ready. As they dragged the 3 men away, Donovan locked eyes with Elisa, his gaze promising retribution. But Elisa stood tall, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, of victory, of freedom truly won. Jacob wrapped his arm around her as she swayed, and she turned into his embrace, not caring who saw. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. The legal part, maybe, Jacob said, watching Donovan being led away. But yes, you're free, legally and officially free. As they left the courthouse, surrounded by well-wishers and still hostile faces alike, Elisa stopped on the steps. She looked back at the building, then at Jacob. In my grandmother's stories, warriors would take new names after great victories. She said, I think I will keep Elisa Birdsong. It is who I became to survive. But now I can choose who to become next. And who is that? Jacob asked. She smiled, that radiant smile he'd seen only glimpses of before. A free woman, a teacher. Perhaps I could help other Apache children learn English without losing themselves. A rancher's wife, if he'll have me. Many things. The choice is what matters. Jacob pulled her close, there on the courthouse steps with half the town watching. The rancher says yes, by the way, if you'll have him. I'll consider it, she said, but her kiss suggested the decision was already made. As they headed home, truly home now, the sun broke through the clouds that had gathered during the trial. The desert stretched before them, harsh and beautiful, full of dangers but also possibilities. And for the first time since that night 5 years ago when his world had ended, Jacob McAllister felt the future opening before him not as an empty expanse to be endured, but as a promise to be embraced. The journey back to the ranch took 2 days, their pace unhurried now that the shadow of pursuit had lifted. The November air carried the sharp scent of creosote and sage, and the mountains to the north wore caps of early snow. Jacob drove the wagon while Elisa sat beside him, her cousins and uncle in the back with the Garretts following behind. As they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, Elisa drew in a sharp breath. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and copper, transforming the modest buildings into something almost magical. It looks different, she said softly. How so? Before, I saw only a place to hide. Now. She paused, searching for words. Now I see home. They were met at the gate by an unexpected sight. Several neighbors had gathered, including some who'd been hostile before. Even Carl Hendricks was there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. As Jacob helped Elisa down from the wagon, Carl stepped forward. McAllister, Miss Birdsong. He cleared his throat. I owe you folks an apology. What I said before, how I acted, it wasn't right. When we heard what those men were really about, what they'd done. He shook his head. My Martha gave me an earful about Christian charity and judging folks unfairly. She was right. Elisa studied him for a moment, then extended her hand. We all carry our fears, Mr. Hendricks. What matters is what we do when we face them. Carl shook her hand, relief plain on his weathered face. Martha sent over a cake, said it's for celebrating justice done. As the evening progressed, the yard filled with neighbors who'd come to show support. Tables were set up. Food appeared as if by magic, and someone brought out a fiddle. What had begun as a homecoming transformed into an impromptu celebration of community and acceptance. Jacob found himself watching Elisa as she moved through the crowd. She'd changed from her courthouse dress into simpler clothes, but she carried herself differently now, shoulders back, head high, no longer trying to make herself small. When she laughed at something Susan Garrett said, the sound carried across the yard like music. She's good for you, Tom Garrett said, appearing at Jacob's elbow with 2 cups of coffee. Haven't seen you this alive in years. She saved me as much as I saved her, Jacob admitted. Maybe more. As the party wound down and neighbors began departing, Elisa found Jacob by the corral. The moon had risen full and bright, silvering the landscape. In the distance, coyotes sang their ancient songs. Your people are kind, she said. Not all, but enough. They're your people too now, if you want them to be. She leaned against the fence rail, looking out at the vast expanse of desert and mountain. My grandmother used to say that home is not a place but a feeling, where your spirit can rest. She turned to him. My spirit rests here. Jacob, with you. He pulled her close, and they stood together in comfortable silence. After a while, she spoke again. There is something I should tell you. About the brand, about what it means. You don't have to. I want to. No more secrets between us. She took a breath. It is not just a mark of sale. The pattern, it shows which house bought us. The silver dollar in Massilia, a place where men paid to. She stopped, then continued more firmly. But I was lucky. The other girls protected me, said I was too young, too new. They took my turns until we found a chance to run. Jacob's arms tightened around her. You don't have to be that person anymore. You never have to be her again. No, she agreed. But she is part of who I am. The girl who survived, who learned that kindness can exist even in hell, that sisters can be found in suffering. She looked up at him. Can you love someone who carries such marks, inside and out? I already do, Jacob said simply. All of you, past and present, and whatever future we build. She kissed him then, under the vast western sky, with the desert wind blessing their union and the mountains standing witness. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Jacob woke early, as was his habit. But for the first time in years, he woke with purpose beyond mere survival. There was work to be done, always work on a ranch. But now it felt different, meaningful. He found Elisa already up, standing in what had been Mary's garden, studying the dormant earth. Spring will be here before we know it, she said as he joined her. This soil is good. With care, it could bloom again. Mary always said the same thing, never got to see it through. He paused, then added, Maybe you will. We will, she corrected. Together. Over breakfast, they made plans. Nayati, his strength returning daily, spoke of teaching Jacob better Apache horse training methods. The cousins wanted to learn more about cattle ranching. And Elisa had ideas about the house, small changes that would blend both cultures, making it truly theirs. There's something else, Jacob said as they cleared the dishes. If you're willing, I'd like to do this proper. Court you as you deserve. And when you're ready, if you're ready, make it official before God and law. Elisa smiled. Are you proposing, Jacob McAllister? I'm proposing to propose, he said, when the time is right, when you've had time to be free, to choose without pressure or need. You deserve that, the chance to choose freely. I have already chosen, she said softly, but I understand what you offer, and I am grateful for it. Time to heal fully, time to build something strong. She touched his face gently. You are a good man. Jacob, Mary chose well. As did I, he said, catching her hand. As did I. Later that morning, as they worked side by side repairing the garden fence, Sheriff Morrison arrived with news. Donovan and his associates would face trial in the spring. Federal marshals were involved now, and other women had come forward with testimonies. The trafficking ring was unraveling. You started something important, Morrison told Elisa. Your courage in that courtroom gave others the strength to speak. We all start small rebellions, Elisa replied. Sometimes they grow into justice. As the sheriff left, Elisa stood quietly for a moment, her hand unconsciously touching her shoulder where the brand lay hidden. I want to show you something, she said suddenly. She led Jacob to a spot near the garden where morning glories had once grown wild. According to the remnants of old trellis work. Mary's flowers? Jacob asked. Yes. But look, she knelt, brushing aside dead growth to reveal tiny green shoots. They survived, dormant, waiting, but alive, ready to climb toward the sun again. Jacob knelt beside her, seeing the metaphor she offered. Like us, she agreed. Marked by our past but not defined by it, growing towards something new. As they worked together in the garden, preparing soil for spring planting, Jacob felt the truth of her words. They were both scarred, him by loss, her by cruelty, but here in this valley between the mountains, they were writing a new story, Not one that erased the past, but that transformed it into foundation for something better. The sun climbed higher, warming the desert floor. In the distance, Nayati was teaching the cousins a traditional song. The cattle lowed contentedly in the pasture, and in Mary's garden, now Elisa's garden, now their garden, two people worked side by side, planting seeds of hope in ground that had known too much sorrow. "What will you plant here?" Jacob asked. "Herbs my grandmother knew. Vegetables Mary grew. New things neither culture has tried." Elisa smiled. "A garden like us, mixed heritage, stronger for its diversity." "I like that," Jacob said, taking her dirt-smudged hand in his. "A frontier garden, something new under the western sky." She squeezed his hand, her amber eyes bright with possibility. "Yes, something new and beautiful in ours." As they returned to work, the morning light blessed their labor, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and promise. The frontier was still wild, still dangerous in its ways. But here, in this small valley, love had taken root between two wounded souls, and like the dormant morning glories waiting to bloom, that love would climb toward the light, transforming scars into strength, pain into purpose, and two separate paths into one shared journey across the vast and beautiful western landscape. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures that healed them, but the small moments, working side by side, sharing meals, learning each other's languages and customs, choosing each day to build rather than destroy. The Wild West had tried to break them both, but instead it had brought them together, forging something stronger than either could have been alone. And as the sun reached its zenith over the Arizona territory, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Jacob McAllister and Elisa Birdsong stood together on the porch of their shared home, looking out at the future they would create, a future where love transcended prejudice, where justice could prevail over law, and where two people from different worlds could write a new story under the endless western sky. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's on a long drive through the desert, by a cozy fire, or somewhere unexpected. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that capture the spirit of the frontier, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the horizon.